says we're recording.
Hey guys, welcome back to another week of the Two Guys on Politics podcast. I'm producer Brian Broeking.
Welcome, my fellow Americans. I'm Bill Lipinski, and this is our news, views, and comments.
And I'm Ray Hanania, and we got two topics we're going to talk about in this edition of Two Guys on Politics with our producer Brian Broeking. One is the Biden banning Chinese computer chips. And then we're going to look at the continued January 6th committee hearings on the alleged insurrection. Brian, what is it about computer chips that whenever I think of computer chips, I always think about Chinese. I think the computer chip is a Chinese word, given all the influence they've had on our computer products. But what did Biden do?
Well, I think the landscape of computer chips and the intense need for them in the future has kind of been highlighted over the past couple of years. And it's kind of come down to, in the past couple of weeks, Joe Biden effectively gave the Huawei ban to the entirety of the Chinese chip manufacturing industry. So what that essentially meant was, months ago, Huawei, a chip manufacturer in China, was caught doing kind of some devious activities, spy type, peering on networks, different things like that. And they were sanctioned for this. And they couldn't work with American contractors. America was blacklisting them throughout the world's markets. And what Biden's effectively done is given that those same kind of bans to the entirety of their industry, the entirety of their chip industry. So what this at its biggest level is US persons working for this industry, which there are a lot, can now not maintain their US citizenship if they want to continue working for these companies. So what that really does at the end of the day is essentially beheads the top of these companies that are mainly run by Americans. Huawei poached Apple employees, top Apple employees in 2015 to develop their chip kind of infrastructure. And this is just kind of the first blow that we've tried to hit on the chip manufacturing in China.
So are they, how much of the industry does China, how much influence does China have on, the American computer industry that in terms of, creating these computer chips?
So from what I understand, it's more of a future concern rather than a current concern. The US kind of considers itself as part of the Chip Four, which would be the US, Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea. And then the fifth entity is China. And China, for the past 2 decades, has essentially been stealing American IP in different pieces, whether it be hiring these people or actually stealing the data on the back end and using it to build their own chips. So they're becoming a more major player, but I think we're looking at it, and the lens this is looked at through is national security. American military personnel and people throughout the world are beginning to realize the future of warfare is going to be cyber, it's going to be AI driven. And what drives AI is these chips. So at the end of the day, this becomes something to hamper the Chinese military, and in effect also limits their economy because it's so important on an economic scale too.
And the other question, go ahead, Bill, sorry.
I was going to say, I'll just say quickly, then you can speak up, Ray. I think this is one of the most significant things that the Biden administration has done since they took over the White House. I'm very, very happy that they've done it. And I will go into more details after you get a chance to talk, Ray. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask a question about, computer chips are so critical to our computer technology. I don't trust the Chinese. They could program things in those computer chips, that might be, that might steal information or might make it easier for one day for them to, who knows, launch some type of cyber attack or some hostility or, maybe not a war, but, to do something negative to us. I don't understand why we allow them to do that. It's because it's cheaper, right? It's all, they have kids sitting at little tables. That's the image I have of them exploiting children to make these.
Well,
Well,
really, the
there's
chips that we have in this country, 90% of them come from Taiwan, 10% come from Korea. But these things are things that we originally set up. We pretty much invented them. We pretty much improved them. And then for some unknown reason to me, we farmed them out. We farmed them out to Taiwan. We farmed them out to Japan. We farmed them out to Korea. And then the Chinese got involved. And we don't have many of their chips at all, but they have taken so many of our individuals from the Silicon Valley to develop their own chip industry. And they are doing it primarily for military purposes. Although, as Brian said, these chips are also involved in, business nowadays. And I believe whoever controls the computer chip controls the future. It is going to be the dominant nation in this world. And that's what the Chinese are striving to do. And I think what Biden has done is short-circuited their attempt to do this. It certainly is going to slow them down. Most people think that the West, the United States, leads in this, and they're a couple of generations ahead. But if we continue to allow the Chinese to steal our ideas, allow the Chinese to take our personnel out of Silicon Valley, they can catch us and pass us. So what this does, I hope, is slow them down very, very considerably. That's where I think it's such an outstanding thing to do. And on top of that, the Biden administration also has gotten money appropriated for us to bring this chip manufacturing and chip development back to the United States. So we won't have to depend upon anybody else, because I don't really think it's a very good idea to depend upon Taiwan, which is our ally, but right 110 miles from Chinese mainland. And then the other place we get them from primarily is Korea, right next to North Korea. Just doesn't, I don't know how this ever happened, but we've done a lot of silly things, in the past. And I think this is one of the silliest.
And and Brian, did this come up because Apple was planning to use these Chinese memory chips, and so Biden intervened and stopped it, or is it like a blanket ban, a blanket?
So kind of how it works is there's really 4 steps in creating these chips. There's the design, then there's the building of them, there's the testing of them, and then there's the raw materials needed to build them. China has the latter two. They have the raw materials to build them, and they have the facilities to test them. Taiwan is the biggest. Taiwan Semiconductor Company, among others, is the biggest company in the world that manufactures them. But the design of these chips, as you said, is mainly in the US, because that's where the main value capture is in this business model. The rest of it doesn't make a lot of money. So the idea is China is trying to kind of up the game on the design side so that they can design the next generation of chip to use in their facilities. So it is a kind of battle where you're constantly trying to stay ahead. And that's both a, public goods, like private market, real economy type thing, but it's also a military piece. Part of the reason the US military is so strong, not just because of the numbers, the funding, and other things, is because the chip technology is so far advanced compared to Russia and China, who share a lot of their chip technology between their Russian fighter jets. The Chinese fighter jets have very similar technology there. So at the end of the day, it's this piece of, how do we protect American IP? And that's something we've been struggling with in China for 2 decades now, ever since they became a real major player. They've been consistently stealing. Trump, one of his big messages was, China is stealing from us. But the problem I see with this kind of change in policy is it doesn't exactly align the incentives with our allies in what I called the chip 4 before, where, we're trying to align with Japan, Taiwan, Korea, and us as the main chip manufacturers of the future. But the issue is we have these inner conflicts with each of these countries, specifically South Korea, which isn't in our EV tax credit that we just passed a couple of months ago in the Biden administration. South Korean cars aren't a part of that, so they're less willing to, coordinate here. So it's really, again, similar to the Ukrainian, conjoining of all the allies. We need to keep everyone on board and, beating the drum with us here. And I just don't see how we will long term.
Yeah,
Well,
and
see, I think long
go
term, if we stay consistent with this policy, I think we do get Japan, Korea, and Taiwan more on board. Let's be frank about it. The reason those nations exist free and independent is because of the American military. And I think they realize that, and I think it'll be much easier to get them to cooperate with us than it has been the Europeans, who never seem to learn that they need us a lot more than we need them.
yeah, and
all this is true. It's also like private markets. We're a capitalist-driven Western culture, and these private markets, entities are just going to keep offshoring American manufacturing and American, production outside of our borders because they want to avoid these kind of, restrictions on supply. At the end of the day, China has 1.3 billion people that we want to supply goods with at one point. We can't be, limiting ourselves. An entire third of the world's population, is essential of the developed world's population is essentially in China. So you need American exports need to go to China at some point. So we can't just, cut that off entirely and just assume, the US will go through and through.
do you both think?
Export to them anything that cannot be used for military purposes. Otherwise, we should not offshore any of that kind of stuff to China. Excuse me, Ray, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, do either of you think that this is Biden simply playing politics, worried about the November 8th elections, that, pandering to conservatives who are concerned about the growing influence of China and all the accusations about his son, Hunter Biden, having those investments in Ukraine and in China? This looks like he's standing up to China. When you think about it, is this purely politics the way a lot of his other decisions have been?
Right.
I mean,
Well,
what do you think?
I mean, I've seen a lot of commentary that has said exactly what you're saying, where this is him playing politics, but I frankly don't really see it as that. I think there are two clear parties inside the Biden White House, one that wanted to do this, and the other, the more centrist liberal piece that didn't want to touch this at all. And the part that did want to take action clearly won here, but I don't think that wins him any votes. As much as Trump talked about China cheating us and these different kind of things, I don't think that's something that shows up in the ballot box. I don't think the average American is thinking about this. This is essentially a military idea, and that's something no American is thinking about when they cast their ballot.
Well, I agree with Brian that I think it was done for the best reasons, but unfortunately, I don't think the American people know much about it whatsoever. It's not the easiest story to follow. It's been in the New York Times. It's been in the, the conservative paper, the Wall Street Journal, but you have to look for the story. There are usually long, detailed stories. I had lunch today with two individuals who are intelligent individuals. They are former state office holders, and I brought this issue up to them. They didn't know what I was talking about. Now here's two individuals who have been in government, who follow things that are going on. Both of them dislike Trump very much, and they can tell you certain things about Trump, but they didn't know about this at all. So I don't think it's going to win the Democrats or Biden any kind of votes whatsoever, because it's a very important story, but very few people even know what's going on.
Well, to quote Biden, I would say I have two words for us: let's move on. So,
okay.
So the other topic was the January 6th committee, and I thought it was interesting because for the first time, I've actually started to hear how Speaker Nancy Pelosi intentionally blocked the appointments of several Republicans, including Republicans who voted, against Trump, to investigate what he was doing or that criticized Trump. She blocked their appointments. I think one of them was the minority leader, Kevin McCarthy, was trying to, I think, appoint Jim Banks and Jim Jordan, Republicans from Indiana and Ohio, to serve on the January 6th committee. And then she just said no. She decided that she wasn't going to allow them to be on there. And this was a committee that was created by the Democrats and that is focused on the Republican Party, not just the Republican Party, but focused on Republicans that supported Donald Trump. And then they allowed two Republicans on it who were openly critical of Trump. So that story is starting to come out more and more than it has. And I'm wondering, does that bother you that she prevented, what might be described as objective Republicans to participate on the January 6th committee that has been conducting hearings since July? Or is that irrelevant, do you guys think?
Well, I don't know so much the other congressman you mentioned, but Jim Jordan, I know for a fact is a rabble rouser. He'd go up there and try and make a whole show of this. And I mean, frankly, it makes sense from a political perspective that you wouldn't want to let Jim Jordan be on this committee. But at the same time, I don't think anyone ever thought it was going to be a true bipartisan committee. It was 3 people who voted to impeach Trump on the Republican side, right? At the end of the day, I don't think that the people they picked for this committee were ever going to matter. I don't think the way they described January 6th to Americans was effective in any way to really influence things going forward. So I think this was basically a pony show for the most part, and it didn't effectuate anything in reality. It was something for them to do instead of getting real things done in Washington.
I'm one of the few Americans that probably watched 95% of these hearings. I was very much impressed with the information that was put forward at these hearings. I learned a lot of things that I didn't know. I think it furthered the narrative that Donald Trump incited these people to do these things. I can understand Nancy not putting Jordan on there. He is an absolute wacko. There is no question about that. By the same token, I think by her doing that, it ruined any chance she had of having this committee appear to be objective. Even though, as I say, I watched it, I think they were quite objective. But once again, the results say that not 1 single % was changed because of these hearings, percent as far as who's with Trump and who is against Trump. I think that Trump's image is sealed in concrete in this country. No matter what is said or done about him is not going to change any minds. So once again, I say, if you wind up indicting him for any reason whatsoever, you better make sure you convict this guy. Because if you don't, the next president of the United States will be Donald Trump.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Donald Trump, and I openly said this, I voted for him when he ran, not because I liked him or thought he was this great leader, but he was the only alternative put forth by the Republican Party that survived everything and that got to the convention, and he became the Republican Party nominee. And I don't believe in voting for third party candidates because I think that's a throwaway vote, or it's oftentimes a negative vote against somebody that might be better. So I look at politics as who's bad and who's better. And I thought Trump was better than Hillary Clinton. So that was the only reason I voted for him. He certainly was a big disappointment. He had some great ideas, but he just, as we know, he was kind of handicapped by his inability to stand up to personal criticism or personal remarks. He just couldn't stop himself from engaging in the mud, at the level, at the curb, the street, and get into these name calling fights that demeaned his office. But then on the other hand, I looked at serious problems with Hillary Clinton, and I thought, okay, I'll give this guy a chance. He turned out bad. I then voted for Biden. I thought Biden was going to bring everybody together. We know that hasn't happened. And now this January 6th committee just seems like another effort to continue to divide the country, a weapon that they're using purely for the November 8th elections, to make an argument that Trump tried to orchestrate an insurrection. Now, I've gone through some of the evidence that this, what I consider a very biased committee, has presented, and it may seem reasonable. I don't believe it, though. I don't believe the evidence. I don't think the evidence has credibility. I don't think that the remarks, the first thing in this latest hearing, that where they postponed it, and now they're resuming it 3 weeks before the election, where they say, oh, we're going to subpoena Trump and make him testify. He's not going to testify before that committee, but it makes great politics. But I remember the committee chair, Thompson, I think first thing out of his mouth when he opened this last hearing was, I know there are a lot of people who don't believe what we're doing is, objective and fair. And he's asked the public, look past that and look at the evidence. But that to me is the point that is the problem with the evidence. Jordan may have been this, that Republican we were talking about, Jordan, he may have been an extremist, he may have been a crackpot, he may have been whatever, but he was elected by Americans. He represents a state, and he is a member of, our elected, body. And for Pelosi just to say, I don't want them, tells me in the clearest way that this committee is worthless. It's a waste of our taxpayer money. It's purely about politics, and that I can't trust anything that they have to say.
Well, as I say, I watched it. I thought it was very informative. I didn't think it was that biased, but it didn't change anybody's mind. I think a more critical problem we have in this country is we talked about what Joe Biden and his administration did in regards to China, the chips, which is very, very important. It's not that many people know about it. There's not that many people that are going to bother to read about it. And here we have this hearing that goes on and on and on. I think it presents, good information. You didn't think too much of the information, but at least we know what the committee had to say. Most Americans didn't bother with it. It hasn't changed anything. Everybody believes what they believed before. I don't know how you get through that divide. I don't know. Somehow we have to do it, because we cannot continue to go along the way we're going along. When we have a dangerous adversary like China out there, we are going to have to be, united, to compete against that country. And I don't know how we get there. I don't know who does it for us.
Well, I have one question for you guys, and maybe we can talk about this. And it's related to that, which is when Biden was running, a lot of the Democratic, more independent-sided arguments for Biden was he's going to bring the country together. He goes across party lines. He does these kind of things in the sense that he was going to be the one to heal this country. I never thought that. I never believed that. I didn't see how that was possible given the circumstances. So the question becomes, does it matter who our politicians are anymore? Or is it just the parties that are represented by these figures at the top that just get, shoehorned into, one side or the other? Because to me, Trump had no other choice than to do all the things he did, because that's what his party needed. And now Biden's the same way. I don't see something needs to break in the party structure, not the politician structure, to get effectual change in this country.
Yeah, and listen, I would say that, Biden has not been very successful in bringing people together. That was one reason I thought it would be worth voting for him. there were a lot of things I disagreed with him about his policies toward the Middle East. You know, I mean, being Arab American, he was not my first choice to be president of the United States, given his great bias on the Israel-Palestine conflict, you know, where he said he's a Zionist. Now that's his right. And, you know, if that's what he wants to be, he can. But what I did think that once he was elected and when I voted for him, I think he should have at least tried. Even though, you know, Brian, you're right. Maybe it's impossible to bridge this gap, but I haven't seen anybody try. He could have tried. He could have been the better person. But I'm wondering now, after I've seen him in office for 2 years, is he actually the leader, or is he part of a group of people that are actually leading through him and he's doing what they want? And I think those people around him are from the far left. I think they're extremists. I think that they're warning about politics. And I really think that they're more worried about whether the Republicans are going to take over the House than they are about doing what's right for the American people. There's Daley, you know, Bill, you knew Richard J. Daley, and he said good government is good politics. You do the right thing, and that becomes the politics that, you know, helps you, you know, rise up among voters. But when it's so manipulative and it's so obvious, even if Biden is trying to be honest and fair, I think that the way they've done it discredits that and makes me think that he's no better than Trump. He's just a different version of Trump, a lot different. Maybe he doesn't say the sexual things he said about women, but I don't know, corruption, his children, his son versus Trump's children, how are they different? You know, so those are the things that really bother me. The hypocrisy is the big challenge I see.
You mentioned hypocrisy. I had some hope for Joe Biden when he was running, based upon his 40 years of being in the United States Senate, being a rather moderate individual, working across the aisle for compromise with the Republicans. But he had also been a supporter of the Hyde Amendment for 40 years. All of a sudden, in the middle of the presidential campaign, he decides that the Hyde Amendment is not a good amendment, and he repudiated it. Why? Because the extreme left was not happy with his abortion position by supporting the Hyde Amendment. Right then and there, I thought to myself, here is a man that you are not going to be able to depend upon. He has already been captured by the extreme left wing of his party.
Yeah, to me, the way I see it is we haven't had a true president since 08 Obama. No matter how you feel about Obama and the things he did in his first term, he was a president with an idea and the party got behind him. Every president we've had since then, the president falls in line with the party. And that's a problem in this country. This is a country built on individual success, individual, you know, the highs and the lows of the individual are embraced by American culture. And the problem is when we have our presidents falling behind to the party, the big structure, you might as well be the Communist Party at that point because you're one large entity. The great thing about America, and the great thing about presidents was they were able to effectuate these individual ideas and this individual change throughout history. You look at Teddy Roosevelt and the things he did individually, and then the party fell in line with him. And I think we need more of that to really see the change in the country. Presidents need to buck the party.
And Bill, let me ask you, you watched all the hearings, right?
Yes.
At any time, did they bring up a witness that said that Donald Trump called Nancy Pelosi and said, you should bring the National Guard in so that we could manage what problems might be there? And that, in fact, she said, no, she didn't want to do it. And she had her own aides there with cameras ready to document what was happening because they saw it as an opportunity to make Trump look bad. The issue I have is there's ample evidence of that being out there, and a biased committee only presenting one side of the evidence is essentially a kangaroo court. We didn't see that evidence. Why
Well,
not?
Based upon the information I have, she had no authority to bring in the National Guard or the United States military. The one person who did is the President of the United States, and we know that he didn't do it. But I just want to say one thing. We talk about the party and the party being important. I will say this about Donald Trump. I believe the principal reason that he was elected and why he came so close the second time is because he articulates the grievances of many, many people in this country, grievances that they've had for years, grievances that have been growing and growing and growing. It's primarily the white working class and the white lower middle class, their grievances. He articulated those. That, to me, is why he was elected president. He heard about them, he understood them, he took them, and he ran with them. I don't think he ever heard about them until he was running for president, but he articulated their problems, their concerns, their issues. I think that's something we have to remember and think about also.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And it really isn't about the president, whether Donald Trump comes back or not. The grievances are still going to be out there. And I think
Absolutely.
you're right. Someone needs to address them. And there seems to be a war to prevent that from happening, which I feel is wrong. I think everybody's grievances should be addressed in a respectful way, whether you're white, whether you're Black, Asian, Hispanic. We can't always just hide behind a shield of race and say this race is good and that race needs to be punished. This idea of using race, all the time to run everything, I think is terrible, and it's just reinforcing this divide. I think it's not going to end up well for this country.
Okay.
So we'll adjourn this January 6th investigation into the insurrection. I don't know. I'm upset with the term.
To overthrow democracy in this country?
Well, listen, if you were going to overthrow democracy, let me ask you a question, Bill. Would you go to the White House to do it, or would you go to the steps of Congress and break into Nancy Pelosi's office? How much democracy are you going to end up disrupting by taking pictures off of her wall in her very expensive office? I just don't see it.
If I wanted to do it, I would have called in the military and said,
Exactly.
listen, no, there's a bunch of communists that are trying to take this election away from me. We have to do something about it. General,
right.
Admiral, will you send
right.
your troops in, to declare martial law? I'll declare martial law. You follow up with it, and I'll be able to stay in power, and I'll be able to hunt down these communists. That's what I would have done. Not send a ragtag bunch of people to the Capitol.
Yeah, and maybe that's why Trump, who, you're right, had the power to bring in the National Guard, but wanted Pelosi to join him so that it didn't appear. Can you imagine if he had called in the National Guard? It would have been evidence against him that he was actually militarizing his insurrection beyond 800 crazy people out of 30,000 that had been charged. To me, it's a hoax. It's not about Trump. It's about this hypocrisy in our politics. It's this divide. And I think that's the worst part of what we're seeing in America today. So,
well, you say 30,000 people, but all 300 million of us were invited to that rally if we wanted to go. So that's what you have to start with.
Well, my point is that 800 out of, I don't care how many people, there's a debate over it. Some people have said 200,000 people were there, 30,000. I'm trying to lowball it because as far as you lowball it, 800 people out of this big rally doesn't sound like an insurrection when only about maybe 100 of them have really been charged with serious offenses and the rest have been charged with trespassing, which, by the way, in Illinois isn't a crime anymore, that according to the Democrats who have introduced that. So I wonder if they're going to
that's
pardon
for another
those.
podcast, Ray, and we bring that up the next time around. I just would like to find a candidate who it truly believes that it's morning in America.
All right. I'm Ray Hanania.
I'm Bill Lipinski.
And I'm Brian Broeking.
And we will see you
Have a
guys next,
wonderful week.
we'll see you next Tuesday, everybody. Thank you.
Yes.
All right, stop live